we went back and my 90th birthday and saw my old air base, and they made a museum out of the control tower there, which is very nice. Talked to a lot of people that do there, and I went to see my paternal grandfather's home in Stanford, England. I thought I was dead the first day. I got hung up in a tree with my parachute, and I couldn't get out of the harness. And there was somebody down below. I couldn't see them for the foliage shooting at me, but I could see the flashes. And we're always armed with a sidearm, so I took my .45 auto, planted it down where the flashes were coming from, and emptied it, and then everything stopped. And I threw the gun away and was trying to get down to get my knife out of my boot, and I couldn't reach it. And finally a call came from down below. It says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I can't get out of the harness." And I thought it was, well, one of my crew members maybe. Perfect English. Turned out he was a sergeant in the German army. He was from Yonkers, New York. And he came over here in 1939 to bury his grandmother and got conscripted into the service. So he spoke very good English. We chatted a while. I gave him some cigarettes and so forth. And then as we were leaving, as he got me down out of the tree and I was leaving, I could see this clump of uniforms. And they looked kind of strange, but I got closer to them. I could see there were children, Hitler Youth, with little Burt guns, and they're the ones that were shooting at me. Well, I'd evidently killed all three of them. So I thought, oh boy, I'm dead now. But he didn't say anything. He just looked at him, and he looked at me, and he says, "I don't care for him either." Very strange. But they took me to a farmhouse. In the farmhouse, they put me on his chair. I had an injured left leg, and it was a straight chair, and I wanted to stretch my leg out, so I put the chair back to the wall, sitting like this. And there was a big commotion out front. The door flew open. And here stood a German officer, short, a lot of red on his uniform. I figured he was a general of some kind. He took one look at me, pulled his little pistol out, and started shooting. And the sergeant stuck his head in the door behind him and did this to me, and stand up. That's when I got the signal. So I popped the chair out and stood up. After that, everything was fine. In shooting and everything, the general lost his hat, and he was just as bald, very bald. And he was a spitting image of Erich von Stroheim, an old Hollywood star. Monocle, the whole bit. After I stood up, everything was fine. This I didn't understand. So after that, they put me in an ambulance, took me to a hospital, looked at my leg, said my leg was all right. And I ended up in a Catholic cathedral in Little France. In Little France, they put me in the basement in a chicken wire cage, took all my clothes, threw me in this cage, and disappeared. And that evening, I got to looking around, and there were big caskets, huge caskets of wine, barrels of wine right in the walls. And monks would be coming down these staircase, and they would have big pitchers, and they would take wine out of these barrels and then go back up. And after a while it got dark, and then down came a bunch of group of soldiers. They weren't in all uniforms. Some of them were just pants and suspenders and so forth. And they came down there and they opened the cage. I was laying down. There was a kind of a high bench in there. They grabbed me, turned me around, put me face down on this bench. And I spent the next 2 or 3 hours while they sodomized me. I thought I was going to die then. But I turned around, and the fourth guy had his turn. I turned around, and with my good knee, I hit him as hard as I could in the groin. He screamed. Everybody yelled, chattered. There were a lot of things. And somebody hit me with a rifle butt, and I don't remember anything after that. But I do remember that it was real strange because there was an audience. All this went on with an audience. So the next morning, I guess it was the next morning or the next day, they came down and they gave me a one-piece coverall, which I got into. I was barefoot, and there was a lot of commotion going on around and so forth, and they put me on a train. And evidently there'd been air raids through there that morning, because going through from Lille, we went down into Belgium, and going through a town of Tournai, Belgium, through the marshalling yards, I could see everything was all, we had hit it that morning and bombed it and torn it up pretty good. We went through that marshalling yard and ended up in Brussels. And in Brussels, we were in the main station there, and we were, excuse me, we were attacked by a bunch of little old ladies with umbrellas. And they, in turn, one of them handed one of the fellows, there were 6 of us, one of them handed one of the fellows a note, and the note said, "Follow the man in the red coat." And we didn't know what, so the guards were busy handling the little old ladies, and behind us a door opened, and a fella come out with a red coat, with a dust broom and or a dustpan and broom, and started sweeping up cigarette butts and things like that. He looked at us and went back in the door again, and so we followed him. And at that point we were in the French underground. And we followed, were taken from, mostly at night, we didn't go anywhere in the daytime. They found me shoes, clothing, and we rode by bicycle at night. And I remember I was pretty good on a bicycle, but at night when there was no lights or anything, and trying to follow somebody, it was crazy. But we did this for about 3 or 4 days, and ended up in a potato cellar somewhere. And we were headed for the Pyrenees Mountains. We were to go over the Pyrenees Mountains and then into Spain and then into Portugal and back to England. That was the route. But the Gestapo or the Germans had picked out one of the cells going along on that trip. Now, each cell didn't know the other cell, so if they were captured, they couldn't tell the Germans or anybody who these people were. So they had captured one of the cells, and so we were funneled right into these cells into the Gestapo. And in the Gestapo, of course, we were considered spies. Well, a spy at that time was shot, so I figured, okay, I'm dead. But then something was happening. Well, what was happening was the invasion of Cherbourg. And so we were, I guess, put down the line and were sent back to, we ended up in Wetzlar, Germany, which is right out of Frankfurt, in a Red Cross camp where we were interrogated and given other clothing and so forth and so on. In Europe, most of the little towns and older towns in there are all cobblestone streets. And through the ages, they're just slick, very slick. Well, they gave us Polish boots. They all had the hobnails in the bottom. And they held 40 men to transport or 8 horses. And they put 90 of us in one of those, where we were just like cordwood. So nobody could sit, stand, or anything. So we took turns. Half of us would sit for half an hour. The other half would stand. And we take turns, and so we could keep our circulations going. We were in this boxcar 4 days without water or food, but you can go quite a long time without food, but you can't go without water. So half the guys are delirious. They didn't know where they were or what was going on. And we ended up in East Prussia, up in the Baltic Sea, at a camp called, a brand new camp, they call Luft, L-U-F-T, Luft 4. And it was for Air Force personnel only. And there were some British in there already, and some guys in there already, but it was a brand new camp and they were still building on it. Well, they got us out of this boxcar and then double timed us. We were without water for 4 days. We were without exercising for 4 days. They double timed us a half a mile into this camp. And then as we got into the camp, we were met by guards with bayoneted rifles and German Shepherd dogs. So we couldn't hardly move, so if we couldn't hardly move, we were bayoneted, which I still have bayonet scars from trying to get away from them, and dog bites. We were all bitten by dogs and bayoneted. We were in this camp. And from that point on, it kind of eased out a bit. I was in there on that camp 11 months. And until the winter of 45. Yeah, the real cold winter. 44, between 44 and 45. That was the coldest winter they'd had in Europe in 50 years, I think, or something like that. But anyway, in the camp, there were different guards in the camp that came around, and we always had one coming through our barracks or whatever they called it. And this way, but these guys all understood English pretty good, and we found out that most of them are from the United States. We had one we called the Green Hornet, who always wore a green uniform, and we could never figure out where the green uniform came from. And he was from Olean, New York. And he was a Fuller Brush salesman there. We learned that, and several of the other, most of these guys came from New York for some reason. So there. But anyway, we had...
You want a pillow on your back?
No. I remember one of them we called the Green Hornet, and then there was one they called Big Stoop. And this guy was a German wrestler. He was a sergeant of the whole group, and he was about 7'2", and very grotesque features. He had hands twice as big as mine. He would put his hand on the top of my head and pick me up off the ground. And he literally scared me silly. Every time I left the barracks, I made sure, looking out windows and everything, that where this guy was, I didn't want to run into him again. Because he always would find me, pick me up by my head, and then lick his lips. And I don't know what he had in mind. So, whenever one of these guys come in the barracks, we used to use the old circus call of "Hey Rube." Somebody would yell "Hey Rube," and then the guy at the end of the barracks would yell, "What do you want?" So put them off, so we know that there's somebody in the barracks. So then if we were doing something we shouldn't, we'd cut it off. We had a intelligence line that went through there where we had a radio. We listened to BBC every night, got the news. We knew where the Allies were and everything this way. The German newspapers were about a week behind. And when we get a hold of a German newspaper, it was old news. But we knew what was going on all the time. The British intelligence were very good at this. Most of their flyers, in some part of their uniform, there was a part of a radio in a button, sewn in the lining and things this way. So if we got a bunch of British guys together, we had a radio. And we could always pick it up at night on BBC, and they would always broadcast the daily goings on, so we knew what was going on all the time. And then the Russians, of course, started pushing into Berlin in January. Around Christmas time, I guess they were pushing into Berlin. And we were, of course, between Berlin and the Russians. So they were going to move us. So they moved us. They split the camp in two. They moved half the camp west, straight west into Bremen, and on the northern route, and then the other half they moved south towards Munich. And in these marches, there were about, I'd say 5,000 people in a march. Dead of winter. We had very little clothing and so forth. But a lot of my friends went on the northern route. I went the southern route. And on coming down into the southern route, we were attacked by our own forces, as we crossed the Rhine River. And at that point, we all broke off into the woods, got lost, and I was with 6 other guys at that time and a German guard. And the guard seemed to know what he was doing, so we followed the guard, but evidently he didn't know where he was going, so we ended up going west rather than south, and wound up on a big Autobahn from Nuremberg to Munich. And were picked up again by a SS patrol. We were taken then to the city of Dachau, which they had a very large SS camp, a factory that produced SS materials and uniforms and things like that, and a Jewish Holocaust camp. And at that point we were put in with the Russians. They didn't know what to do with us, and the Russians were the ones who were doing all of the dirty work. So we wound up in the oven, working the ovens in Dachau. And this, as I said before, this is where I learned an awful lot about that. And then the destination was a place called Moosburg, which was right above Munich, and there were they had 165,000 prisoners of war there, and they were of all nationalities there from everywhere. It was a conglomeration, and at that point Hitler in his bunker knew he was losing the war when the Russians come into Berlin. I don't know what he did, panicked. He wasn't in very good health, and we know he wasn't thinking straight, but anyway, he issued an order that came down to annihilate all prisoners of war at this point. He blamed us and the Jews and everybody else for his defeat. So General Patton, bless his heart, had deciphered all of the codes, and when these codes came through the air, he picked them up, deciphered them, and decided that's not going to happen. So he sent his 14th Armored Division, which is a point division, and the 25th Infantry, 99th Infantry, and so forth, straight across from the Rhine to intercept the SS before they got to us at Moosburg, which I finally ended up into. And they intercepted these guys 1/2 hour before they got to us. And there was one, very hard in history now to find too much about this battle that went on in Munich, but it was a terrific battle that went through there with the crack SS and the, but anyway, it came out good, and Germany surrendered. That time I have a piece of the surrender flag, which was given to me by the commander of the armored unit that came down there. A fellow, his name is Tom Gibbons. He lives in Palm Springs. I see him every once in a while. We became very good friends. And
Where was he from? Where was Tom?
Where is Tom from? Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, I know. But anyway, that goes into another story of we have a POW organization in the Inland Empire. A group of us, all of us, not all, but a lot of us, got together and formed this POW group. And we are affiliated with the Riverside National Cemetery Support Group. And we're kind of very active in this area on that right now. But, that's basically the story of my life.
What was it like when you, having gone through all of this and then coming back to the United States, what was that experience like?
That experience was, well, like I said before, the government, if you had somebody in the VA looking into this at that time, you would put in a complaint, or they would ask you a question, and you would answer that question. They say, "Oh no, that isn't, no, we can't print that." Well, I don't know what they were printing. We were just telling them the truth. But it seems like Mrs. So-and-so and Madam So-and-so were the chairman of all these things. They didn't understand anything about military goings on or whatnot. They were the principal people that were working with the VA. So we got nothing.
What about the,
Well, I was told, and I had to, when I came back from the service, I went on a 60-day leave. When I came back out, I was supposed to go to a hospital. And I went to the hospital, which was a hotel in Santa Monica, and was had to sign papers there that I would not can't loss of words here. Divulge anything that happened as a prisoner of war or anything like that in the service. I was just not to tell my family, not to tell anybody. I had to sign them, notarize it, the whole bit, the government. Well, after a certain time went on, I didn't say too much about it. Went to work for the Postal Service, and fellows that were with me, they used to laugh all the time and say, well, I went to the University of Heidelberg and so forth. But I really didn't say too much. And in 1980, after all this time, from 1946 to 1980, I didn't divulge too much about what was going on, and in 1980 I got a call from the VA that I was supposed to have a what they called a POW. What did they call it? They had an odd name. Anyway, meeting at the VA, which I went, and for the first time they started asking me what I considered stupid questions. And then when I give them an answer, they would shake their head no. Well, this is when I met Dr. Gonzaga, who became our POW advocate and doctor. And I don't know, it's been an education, I think. In the VA still doesn't understand what a POW is or was. And we're still fighting this to this day. To this modern day, I can go to the VA today. The VA, these people are supposed to know what the veteran is. And I can say, well, they ask me these questions. Okay, I tell them I was a POW. They ask me, what's a POW? I mean, it's mind-boggling, even today. So, I don't know, a lot of the, became very bitter through the decade that nothing, I don't know, it took a lot of understanding. Now they seem to have people that understand what's going on, but I'm still having trouble getting answers to a lot of this. Even here, I'm having trouble. They told me, or they put on a piece of paper, that I was suffering from dementia. And in here, dementia is another area. And I'm having, I've spent 2 weeks now with Mike trying to get out of this. And we can't find anybody that's... Anyway, one more try. We'll see.
All right. Wow. I can't even imagine what you've been through, and I appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, well, some of it was fun, but a lot of it, you had a lot of worry. You didn't know when you were going to get shot, you know.
Definitely.
I was in one area at one time where Heinrich Himmler was executing Jewish people. And one of the Jews broke through from the guards and rushed towards Himmler. He wanted to kill him. And Himmler's captain was with him, pulled his pistol out and shot the man before it got to Himmler. But he was almost to Himmler. When he shot him, the blood spatter got on Himmler's uniform. Himmler became a madman, shot his captain. And these are the kind of people that we were trying to work around, and it took a lot of finesse. But like I say, it was a very good experience. I learned quite a bit.
Definitely.
I spent 8 years as a police officer, and that has helped me quite a bit in analyzing people. Another story on that too is when we came back from Europe, we were supposed to dock in New York City, and there was no berth to dock at, so they sent us to Boston. They sent us to Boston and Camp Miles Standish, which was a very big camp there. We were supposed to be billeted there for the night and given food and so forth and so on. When we got there, it was an empty mess hall with one guy in there mopping the floor. And so we asked him, well, where is everybody? Well, you know. So come to find out that the mess halls and so forth, and the PXs and things like that were run by German prisoners of war. Oh, well, that's nice, they were working. But where are they? They're on a 3-day pass in Boston. So we wrecked the mess hall.
It's 11 o'clock.
Right.
Bingo.
Oh, okay. Definitely.
Are we over?
Yeah, unless there's anything else that you'd like to share. Totally.
Oh, great.